Hi again, Captain Peter Cutsey with part 2 of the manual reversion or loss of System A, System B. In part 1, we just gave you an overview of how to recognize and a little look at the hydraulic system. Now we're going to get into the checklist. The manual reversion checklist is read by the pilot monitoring, of course, and there are no memory items, and condition hydraulic system A and B pressures are low. And before actually the pilot monitoring started reading the checklist, he or she would have shown the checklist to the pilot flying to reassure that she or he is actually reading the proper checklist. Whether you're doing it with the iPad or whether you're doing it with a hard copy, make sure you show the checklist you're about to read to the pilot flying first. This is a technique, but it is important in the airmanship of the operation. Condition, hydraulic system A and B pressures are low, pilot flying, check. System A and B flight control switches, both of them confirm standby rudder. So make sure that you get a confirmation from the pilot flying. The pilot flying will confirm and then standby rudder. Number 2, yaw damper switch on. Remember, the yaw damper tripped off when we lost both hydraulic systems. Turning it on now will actually engage the feed from the standby system. So your yaw damper in the standby system will be operative. System A and B pump switch, all of them off, the 4 of them off. That is both engine-driven pumps and the electric hydraulic pumps. Now, if you notice, I've highlighted the next. Plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. It's important that you, in your planning, set heading now to save time. As you know, in your QRH, if you're down to one hydraulic system, you have to land at the nearest suitable airport. That's one of the items that requires that. So make sure you start heading for that airport. And the airport that you choose is important. Should have a long runway. You're going to be using more runway, as you're going to find out here shortly. And in part 3, we'll look at the performance. So while you're doing that, plan a flaps 15 landing, and at which point the pilot monitoring would go ahead and make that selection in the CDU. And set VREF 15 or VREF ICE. We talked about that before, and we looked at the requirements. So when reading this, the pilot monitoring will read all 3. And if any one of them apply, then you have to make sure that you use VREF ICE, as we indicated and showed you on the CDU. Plan to extend flaps 15 using the alternate flap extension. Now, remember, as we briefed yesterday, to go from flaps up to flaps 15 takes approximately very close to 2 minutes. So use that in your planning and allow enough time to do that. We'll talk more about why you should stop at flap 10 shortly. Don't go beyond flaps 10 until the gear is down. Otherwise, you'll get a landing gear horn. Note, the drag penalty with the leading edge devices extended may make it impossible to reach an alternate field. Remember, your maximum altitude is flight level 200. And you can't use the FMC fuel flow for fuel management. You have to use the actual fuel flow on both the MAX and the 737. Plan for a manual gear extension. We'll look at that shortly. The actual manual gear extension doesn't take very long to do. So in your planning, if you allowed 3 minutes to 4 minutes at the very most, you could get it done. And make sure that it is done before you call for a flap setting greater than 10 degrees, because you will get the horn. Check the non-normal landing configuration distance tables. We'll do that in part 3. The crosswind capability of the airplane is greatly reduced. Very important, you pick an airport with a long runway and a very little to no crosswind, because controllability is difficult. Do not arm the auto brakes for landing. Well, it's not working, as we saw yesterday. Do not arm the speed brakes. They're not working also. So all of these factors will increase the landing distance, as we'll see in part 3. On touchdown, apply steady brake pressure without modulating the brakes. We looked at that yesterday. The accumulator will allow you to stop the airplane. Do not attempt to taxi the airplane after stopping. Don't count on the accumulator having any extra pressure in it. Play it safe. Have your company come and tow you off the runway. Now, we looked at this yesterday. This is just a quick review, and I wanted to do it this way because you'll be using this checklist, but you can remember the colors that I used yesterday for the inoperative and operative and the comparison that I made in part 1. Autopilots A and B are inoperative. Of course, they're manually flying, and all flight spoilers are inoperative. Okay, trailing edge flaps, normal hydraulic system is inop. However, the alternate trailing edge flaps is available. Leading edge flaps and slats normal. The system is inop. However, you do get leading edge slats via the standby hydraulic system. Normal landing gear extension and retraction inop. However, you can lower the gear with manual extension. Now remember, if you have to go around, which we'll discuss in performance tomorrow, you're going to be going around, you're not going to call for the gear up, because once it's down manually, it's down. So you have to brief about that. And you're not going to call for flaps. You can call to retract flaps, but you're not going to be able to retract the leading edges. And you have to discuss how much time it takes to actually retract the flaps from 15 to 10 to 5 and to up. I'm talking about trailing edge flaps. So you have to have that as part of your briefing if in the event of a go-around. And remember, if in the event of a go-around, which we'll talk about in part 3, please review my go-around video. Very, very important that you understand the mythology behind why go-around flaps 15 positive rate gear up is not enough. Yes, it's correct, but you have to elaborate on the actual procedure, and my video explains that well, I think, and it works well. The auto brake is an operative. All right, you don't have auto brakes. Ground spoilers are inoperative. The normal and alternate brakes are inoperative, but the accumulator is working. Both thrust reversers, normal pressure is inoperative, but they are available through the standby system. They'll be slower, and there may be a little asymmetry, so be careful of that when you select reverse. And nose wheel steering is inoperative, so plan to not taxi the airplane off the runway. Now, this is airmanship. If you have a high-speed turnoff and that you're a busy airport and everything is fine, and your captain and you both agree, and he's experienced that you could turn off the runway by trying it on a high-speed turnoff, that is airmanship. Follow your company SOPs. They override all of this. Nothing overrides airmanship, but your company SOPs certainly override, oh, should I taxi off the runway or not? Well, the SOPs say don't, the checklist says don't, we don't do it. All right, important. Deferred items. Now, before you get into the deferred items, make sure you prepare the aircraft for landing. And of course, then you get into the deferred landing, then you can, you do it, pressurization, land altitude. And remember, if you're going to another airport, that could be different. The only time you don't have to change it is if you're returning to the same airport. Recall checked, auto brakes off, landing down at VREF 15 or VREF ice, as we discussed, and then the approach briefing. Who is flying the airplane? Well, you do the approach briefing is written in your company SOPs, follow them. What do I think? Well, I think that the person giving a briefing shouldn't be flying the airplane. You're focusing on the briefing. Give control to the pilot monitoring and let he or she fly the airplane using the auto flight system, well, in this case, a manual flying, and the radios. And then once you've completed especially in this case. To try to give a briefing and manually fly the airplane is next to impossible. Don't be a Superman, or think you are. Okay, all right. Approach checklist complete. And then the alternate flap extension, get into that. And we'll have a quick look at that here. Alternate flap master switch, you'll follow the checklist, 230 knots max arm. Flap lever, you set it to your flap setting that you're going to actually move the flaps to using the alternate system. In this case, flaps 1 is the first setting. The alternate flaps position switch, 230 knots max, hold down, and to extend the flaps to 15 on schedule. Then once the flaps are at flaps 1, then you would set the flaps 1 speed, not before. There's the flaps coming to the flaps 1 position. Now at flaps 1, now you set the MCP speed to the flaps 1 speed. That's done by the pilot monitoring and requested by the pilot flying. Now your next flap setting is flaps 5. So make sure you select the lever to flaps 5 and then go ahead and use the alternate system to get flaps 5. And then set the MCP speed. Now your final flap setting, flaps 15. Now before you go to flaps 15, go to flaps 10. The picture doesn't show that here. Go to flaps 10, get flaps 10, set the flaps 10 speed on the MCP, then do the manual gear extension checklist, which we're going to look at shortly. Once the gear is down and locked, then come back to extending the flaps beyond 10 degrees. This is important. You see on screen, the leading edge flap transit light will remain illuminated until the flaps approach the flaps 10 position. At flaps 10, you should have the leading edge flaps extended. Do not go beyond this setting till you do the manual gear extension. Once the manual gear extension is complete, then go ahead and continue with the rest of the flap. All right, that is important. The actual manual gear extension, you follow the checklist. I just made a quick slide. Of course, you're going to be 270 knots max, Mach 0.82 maximum, and the landing gear lever off. This is on the NG only. As you know, in the max, you have an up position and a down position. So on the max, this doesn't apply. It's up. The landing gear lever is up. There is the door, by the way, the landing gear door. By the way, on your preliminary pre-flight, if that door looked closed, but it wasn't latched, you would have known it. You wouldn't have been able to get the gear up after takeoff. That's something to salt away. Open the door and let the pilot flying be the captain. Of course, the first officer is closest to this panel. Let he or she look after that. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, the uplock is released. The uplock is released once you pull the handle. Start with the right gear or the left gear. Boeing doesn't stipulate. There's really no asymmetric yaw with either one. So I started with the right, and when you pull the cable out to the full extent, you'll get a red light on, and then when the gear is down, you'll get the right gear green. And then go ahead and do the same for the nose wheel, and when you pull the cable out to the limit, the red light will be on, meaning it's unlocked, and when it's down and locked, it'll be green. And then do the same thing for the left. I didn't take a picture here of that because of the space available in the one slide. When you're done the tree, this is the indication you will have. 3 red lights and 3 green lights. Wait until 15 seconds after the last manual gear extension handle, then the landing gear lever down. This is where on the max you would move the landing gear lever from the up position to the down position. Then you should have 3 green lights. So that's basically it. We'll look at gear down performance and all the other performance stuff later in the number 3 video. All right, that's that up to this point. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want a briefing online with your partner, contact me, or alone. My information is on screen. Happy flying, stay professional, and stay passionate. Thank you. See you in part 3.